Bienvenue au Festival Metropolis Bleu 2021. Welcome to the 2021 Blue Metropolis International Literary Festival. My name is Shelley Pomerance. I'm a programmer at Blue Met. And welcome to this event for book industry professionals, which is part of Blue Met's spring program. The title of this event is Social Media, Friend or Foe? For readers looking for book recommendations and a place to exchange views on titles, both new and old, there's a plethora of sites and blogs to choose from, platforms such as Goodreads, LibraryThing, the StoryGraph, Book Riot, the 49th Shelf, which is devoted to Canadian books, The Guardian's Books blog, Book Riot, I could go on here, Kirkus Reviews, and not to mention the usual suspects such as Facebook, Instagram, and Snapchat, which feature oodles of accounts and pages devoted to book talk. Even TikTok is now getting into the act with book talk. But all is not necessarily perfect in the online literary sphere. To talk about the current state of literature on social media and whether social media is a friend or a foe, and what this means for publishers, literary agents, and of course, authors, I'm joined by Christine Swedowsky, formerly Director of International Marketing at Penguin Random House in New York, and currently U.S. Director at World Editions, where she's leading the company's entry into U.S. and Canadian markets, as well as its international expansion. Also joining us is Léonicka Valcius, who was previously a book buyer and marketer for Scholastic Book Fairs Canada before joining the online and digital sales team at Penguin Random House Canada. And she's now an assistant agent with the Transatlantic Agency in Toronto. Léonicka is also the founder of #DiverseCanLit and was the first chair of the board of Fold, aka the Festival of Literary Diversity in Brampton, Ontario. And Nikesh Shukla. Nikesh is the author of a dozen novels for adults and for YA readers. His latest title is a memoir, Brown Baby, a memoir of race, family, and home. He's also a screenwriter and is co-founder with Julia Kingsford of the Good Literary Agency based in London, England, which represents writers of color, working class, disability, LGBTQ, and anyone else who feels they or their stories are underrepresented. In 2018, Nikesh and Julia were named by the bookseller as being among the 40 most innovative people in publishing. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
First, I'd like to ask each of you if you could explain how you use social media. Maybe I'll start with you, Léonicka.
Sure. I love social media. I think it's a great tool. I don't use all social media platforms, but I have a few favorites that I think are really useful for me in my personal life, which involves a lot of books. So I'm partial to Twitter, Instagram, and I use Goodreads to track my own reading. But I think it's a great tool and a great way to stay connected with people, especially when that face-to-face interaction isn't as prevalent.
I'm going to ask you a question which is going to reveal right away that I don't use the web to track my reading. I'm very curious, what does that mean to track your reading?
I read a lot of books, and it's great to have a place that I can say, this one I read, this one I want to read. There are so many books published every year, and it's useful to keep on top of it. Sometimes people ask me, what's your favorite book that you read this year? And I'm like, oh, I'm not sure. There's so many. Did I read that this year or last year? Was it published this year? Or was it an ARC that is not going to be published until a few years from now? So I like having the information at my fingertips. I use Goodreads, and I'm able to quickly see, okay, here's what I read this year. Here's what I really liked. And it's like a prompt and a reminder. And it also helps me when I'm being intentional about what I read. So when I'm asking myself questions about, am I reading enough books by queer writers? Am I reading enough books by women of color? Am I reading enough books in translations? Where are the gaps in my own literary knowledge? I can have a record of what I've done already and where I need to improve.
That sounds very useful because, when you work for a book festival, In my case, I always have people saying to me, what should I be reading? So that sounds like a very useful tool to have. Christine, thank you for that, Léonicka. Christine, can you tell us how you use social media?
Yeah, I don't use it personally at all. I track my reading by having giant piles of books all over my house. But for work, so at World Editions, we connect with our readers and supporters over social media quite a bit. We use Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube for book trailers and author statements or interviews or translator statements. And then we are active on a lot of the book-specific platforms. Goodreads, we mostly use for giveaways. And then the platforms I like the most are more they're more geared towards industry professionals. So that is Edelweiss and most specifically NetGalley, which allows us to build our contact base. So NetGalley is a platform where publishers share digital galleys, and they get requested by booksellers, librarians, but also just consumers who review on Goodreads or Amazon, for example. And it's great because then we get the email address afterwards.
Okay. And Nikesh, how do you use it to promote your own books, to research other people's books, and you're also involved in publishing? So what's your take on it?
I have a very complicated relationship with social media, if I'm going to be honest. As an author, there are, I guess, advantages to being on social media. I would say recently I've just sort of noticed that this is probably a pandemic thing, but just increased usage of things like Twitter has really affected my mental health. Putting a book out during a pandemic with all the bookshops shut and realizing that as loud as you can be about your book on social media, it does represent such a small part of the actual book buying, if I'm being specific, the book buying public, that, it can sometimes feel quite unwieldy. I mean, I wrote a novel about Twitter addiction. My second novel, Meat Space, was all about people who curate their personalities online and then have to enact those curated online personalities in real life and what that does to our sense of self. It was called Meat Space, and actually hilariously, because it was so much about social media addiction, some friends and I decided that we wanted to create a piece of social media ephemera to promote the book. So we sent a tandoori lamb chop into space in 2014. We were actually one of the first people to do one of those goofy send a food item into space stunts, and then everyone copied us and we went viral. Like we were on all the news across the world. The Discovery Channel did like a thing about us, and it just sort of, and then for 4 days the news cycle moved on. And
it was your 15 minutes of fame, right?
It was my 15 minutes of fame, and which was great. And I'm going to say some nice things about social media, and then I'm going to say a couple of not so nice things about social media. The nice things for me as a writer is I feel really connected to my readers, which is really, really great. I get to have conversations with them about stuff that I'm interested in, stuff that I'm researching, their reactions to the book. Every reader projects themselves onto everything you write. And so every time a reader comes to you with their thoughts on your books, it's always going to be something completely new. I've made some really great developed some really beautiful friendships with writers over the years, which started on social media. And it's, if there's one thing that, for all of its problems, the publishing industry really knows how to, if people love a book, they really love that book loudly on social media. And that's one of the advantages of it. And there are things that you could sort of say about how people use social media and the negativity. I guess that the issue that I found, and actually, it's funny we're having this conversation a week after I left Twitter, because I just felt like I had nothing left to say. I just wanted to put what I had left to say into my work. But last summer, I noticed the kind of the sort of the formal restrictions that you kind of get on Twitter. I made some comments about a TV show that were, they weren't hugely positive comments about a TV show, and then they got reported in the national press, and the person who had made the TV show was asked about my comments because, the editor of this book that a lot of people have heard of has said this on Twitter about your show. How do you react to that? And all this kind of stuff. But what they'd actually done was taken one tweet out of a thread and presented that one tweet as my opinion, whereas actually I was trying to make a much wider point about systemic racism, and actually the one tweet they got was the one that seemed like a personal attack on the writer of the show. And when I sort of brought up the lack of contextual integrity with newspaper editors, they were like, look, you put it out into the ether. That's kind of on you. And I get that, but it just made me think long and hard about how easy it is to say stuff on social media, how loudly it can be taken up, and how quickly it becomes about something other than your original intention. And that to me feels like, as a writer, I'm more concerned with writing things that people are still going to be thinking about in 50, 60, 70 years time, and writing a tweet that might really annoy people or for a day just doesn't seem like where my head's at the moment. Sorry, that was a bit of a long answer. I really apologize.
Don't apologize. Léonicka, is there anything about the blogosphere that bothers you? Anything about social media that you think is destructive or harmful? Oh,
there we are. Yeah. So I think we're conflating some ideas, right? There's social media, which is Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, those media platforms. And then there's the blogosphere, if you're calling it that, which is people's individual blogs. And then things like BookRiot aren't blogs, they're media platforms, right? Some of them are independent, some of them are owned by others. So there are lots of different internet spaces that function differently. And I think the biggest way I try to parse them out is, how do they make money and how is the content generated? So is it user-generated content where the company behind it, let's say Twitter, for example, makes money by trying to monetize the views and the eyeballs of everybody who's obsessed with Twitter? Is it a space, or is it a place like BookRiot where it's more akin to an online magazine where they have a cohort of freelance writers? Kirkus, I would certainly put, that's a magazine where their online presence is an extension of their physical magazine presence. So I think it's difficult to put them all in one lump. Mm-hmm. But in terms of social media, absolutely. Social media, I think I like it as a tool because it can be used very effectively. But like any tools, it can also be used very destructively. And what social media has done is given a lot more people access to say things with a much fewer filters to a much bigger audience, which can be problematic as much as it can be helpful, right? So I absolutely see some problems.
So go ahead.
Can I continue?
Yes, for sure.
Thank you. I absolutely see the ways that it has been harmful, the way people's words have been pulled out of context, especially in the way Nikesh experienced. And I think part of that is not necessarily simply the tool, but the way people interact with words, the lack of boundaries, the lack of ground rules, right? I remember sometimes I'll suddenly get an onslaught of racist comments and racist, sexist people in my mentions. And I'll be like, what did I say? And it's a tweet that I put out that had been reposted on BuzzFeed or on some other platform and had been used to foment anger, because anger is as clickbaity as enthusiasm, right? And it's all about the clicks. So it does become destructive, where the more inflammatory, the more sensationalized, the more distorted the message can be, the more it goes viral and the more it benefits the way the social platform. It rewards that behavior. It rewards people being their most base selves. It does not reward nuance. Nobody wants to sit through and read a long form piece that's more thought out on Twitter, right? It rewards the hot takes. So do I completely agree? Yes. And that's why I think more when I use Twitter, I try to use it for a purpose, to game the system for my end. And that's difficult. I decided to stop being angry on Twitter because Twitter is not my journal. I pull out my phone and text my friends if I need to get something off my chest, because Twitter is not a safe space. Instagram is not a safe space. Instagram is a pretty space, and that's it. It doesn't really have the range to capture more than pretty book covers and beautiful gardenscapes. But if you know that, you can then use it to your benefit, right? If you know that Twitter is not a safe space to talk about your feelings, but it's a great place to promote your book in a way, that you can use it in that way. If you know that Twitter, it may be not the great place to talk about the difficulties of the writing process, but a really great place to post an unboxing video, then that's what you use it for. Because
I'd like to go over to Christine now to give her a chance to talk about this. Mm-hmm. Whether you see there, from your point of view, I mean, as in publishing, whether you see there's a negative aspect to social.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Léonicka about the harmful and destructive side effects of social media. But yeah, from a professional perspective, that is not how we use it. So we would never, we try to be very positive on social media, and just, we don't share political opinions or any negative opinions, or make any statements, or engage in, angry back and forth or criticism. So it's really used to share news of our books, to amplify messages of our supporters. So any reviews we receive, or bookstores who display our books that we give shout outs to. So it can be a very positive tool if used that way. It's become a bit of an echo chamber. So it's our supporters saying nice things about us, and we are saying nice things back to our supporters, basically.
And with the fact that newspapers are disappearing or downsizing, which means a lot of book reviews are disappearing, obviously, I'm sure that's one reason why people are turning to literary blogs and websites.
So
can social media replace what newspapers are doing?
I think it doesn't replace what traditional outlets are doing, but it enhances and expands. So there is this old rule of marketing, the rule of 7, which says that a reader needs to be exposed to a book 7 times before a purchase decision is triggered. So you're looking at an integrated approach. You want your book to be talked about on Twitter, to have a cover posted on Instagram, to be displayed in a bookstore. you want it to be reviewed on a blog and in the New York Times, and have your author have an event, and then have a friend recommend the book. And it needs to be seemingly everywhere. So social media alone doesn't move the needle, but a New York Times book review alone doesn't move the needle either. So yeah, it's from a publishing perspective, it needs to be that full package that the reader feels like everywhere they look is the same book.
Léonicka, you've been shaking your head and then nodding your head. Maybe you'd like to respond to Christine there.
I agree with Christine completely. I don't think social media replaces book reviews at all. And I don't think, and one thing I don't think Goodreads does either. User-generated reviews do not replace literary criticism. And I think we make a mistake when we expect it to. When we're reading a review from somebody on Amazon, it is not engaging with the work as art. It is not contextualizing it with the art that has come before it. It is not engaging with it in a way that is robust. It is giving you a reaction to a product they purchased, and that's it. And that's okay. But I absolutely agree with Christine, where the purpose of promoting books and the writers themselves as a brand on social media is to have that repetition so that the book is everywhere. And I think the closest analogy would be to word of mouth, right? If your mom says, hey, you should really read this book, you'd be like, okay, sure, fine. But if your sister also says it, and then your teacher also says it, that's kind of the function that social media does, and influencers too, where these people who you have relationships with in a quasi-social manner are recommending that you read this book.
Okay, and now over to the author. How do you, I mean, a lot of authors don't like to read their reviews of their books anyway, but what's your take on this, Nikesh?
It's interesting hearing you guys talk about it, because obviously I have a very different perspective to the publisher side of it. And for me on the outside of that, it feels like a lot of the social media promotion of books it's sort of like this is how it appears, and like if it's not how it actually is, then please tell me. But it often feels like people going, who wants some free books? And people going, thanks for the free book. And I'm now going to talk about how much I like this book to other people who will then ask the publisher for the free book. And I've always been curious about how much social media and review, like, I mean, this is if anyone could answer this question, they would be a millionaire, right? Like, what does make someone actually buy a book? Because if social media plus great review in a literary journal of note aren't enough to move the needle, and also like because feeds are so busy, like the chance of seeing something 7 times is increasingly small. And it was interesting hearing Christine talk about the kind of the echo chamber of niceness, because like just to kind of when you're working on marketing campaigns, like you move on from marketing campaign to marketing campaign to marketing campaign. But like what I notice a lot talking to authors is actually that social media and like constantly promoting yourself on social media, and if you are the type of person who gets a platform, you're often sort of there is like an expectation either from within or from like your community for you to speak out about certain issues that are either pertinent to the industry or pertinent to the world. And that is something that we should all be doing, but all of this takes a toll on our mental health. Like all of this just really brings us down to the point where like I go into like I'm just coming out of promotion mode. Like since probably January, I've been trying to promote this book, like being very noisy about it on social media. And after a while, like I just feel like there's this meme of Grandpa Simpson from The Simpsons, and it goes, "Old man yells at clouds." I feel like I'm the old man yelling at clouds, and it takes a toll. Like I had to come off Twitter last week because I was just like, the news is obviously as awful as it always is, and I don't need to see it happening 24 hours a day. I can just check in with a verified news source when I'm robust enough to see what's happening in the news. The publishing machine has moved on from the promotion of my book. So like me shouting about it is sort of taking up the oxygen of whatever is coming out this month and all the rest of it. And also, so I just like, part of me just doesn't feel like I've got anything to say, but also the other part of me is like, God, I feel so depressed looking at this.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think as an author, you have permission to let your personality shine through on social media. Like you can be, much more edgy. As a publisher, I think we just don't have that or it would just reflect negatively on other authors if we started to. So I think
the edgy personality is the one that kind of results in a lot of like.
Right.
That's what gets you your 15 minutes of fame.
Yeah, and that's you can do. Yeah, we can't.
Oh, you can do it, but it's the Jurassic Park rule, right? Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do it, right?
I just like to break in. Oh, there's my dog, but he wants to break into. I just like to break in here to say that a really good recommendation for a book, very reliable, that's not Goodreads or Amazon, is one's best friend. That's just a personal figure. If your best friend recommends a book, there's a very good chance that you'll like it. One thing I'd like to ask the three of you is to Christine as a publisher and Léonicka as an agent, how much you expect your authors to do their own promotion on social media. And I'm Nikesh, I get the feeling that you're probably very good at promoting your books, and your publisher, it sounds like, does expect you to do that promotion. So who would like to go first?
I can go because it ties in. But what Nikesh and I were just touching upon, authors can show a totally different side. They can infuse, personality into the way they talk about the book and offer a completely different perspective on it. So it really adds to what the publisher can say, which has to be more neutral. It's one of the biggest things I struggle with working for a translation publisher. I've worked for big houses, US houses before, HarperCollins, Penguin Random House, where authors really are expected to bring in their own platform of readers and be very active online. Many of our European authors or Asian authors don't have an online presence at all, let alone an English one. So if they have a Twitter profile, they only post in whatever language they write in, which means that our authors are basically not discoverable to the English-speaking reader. And that is a huge, huge problem. And it's something that, I work very hard to address. But there is less emphasis in other countries on, the importance of an online presence in selling books. So it's an uphill battle.
It's a North American thing.
Yeah.
And Léonicka, do you expect the authors that you represent to do their own promotion?
I don't like the word expect. I think that sounds like I'm putting a burden on them or an obligation. I'm very collaborative as an agent. So we start our relationship by talking about what are our goals mutually and what are they able to do. So I have some clients who really like social media and are good at it, and some who don't. And so they stay off, because if I were to ask clients who don't like social media to do it, they would either do it poorly and it would be ineffective, or they would do it and it would drain them and sap their creativity and affect their writing, which is the one thing they must be able to do, right? I never want my clients to be so dejected from having to deal with nonsense on social media that their creative spark is squashed. So
just to let you know, both Christine and Nikesh were nodding enthusiastically when you said
wonderful.
Well, it sounds like so listen carefully to your authors.
Yes, and I think that goes with everything. So my goal is more to not to say I expect you to promote your books on social media. It's more, what are you able to do to participate in the promotion of this product? Because at the end of the day, authors also want their books to sell well. Otherwise, they would, keep it on their laptop and share it with their friends. Nobody wants to go through the hassle of the publishing industry if it wasn't to try to reach a bigger audience. And then we have a conversation from there and see how I can now leverage my abilities and the agency's abilities and the publisher's abilities to fill in the gaps where the author is unable to do something.
Nikesh, over to you now.
Léonicka, that is the exact thing that you want to hear from agents, because when I mentor loads and loads of writers, and I spend lots and lots of time with writers, and one of the most frequent questions I get asked, alongside what does a literary agent do, because no one seems to know, is about whether you need to have a social media presence to get ahead. And I usually tell writers, if you feel like you're being forced to do it, you won't be good at it, and you'll get frustrated that you haven't gone viral, and there just won't be any point. So just concentrate on making the book the best it can be, because when all said and done, Twitter might not exist in 5 years' time, but you want people to be studying your book as part of the literary canon in 100 years' time. So what's more important? But just to I don't want to sort of repeat what either Christine or Léonicka have said, because they both said great things, but just to kind of offer another angle, because I do speak to lots of unpublished writers. And one thing I've noticed, especially for writers writing nonfiction, which I think is sort of fascinating in how it talks about privilege and a lack of inclusion in our industry, is that a lot of nonfiction writers of color or writing in the margins or from marginalized communities are often told that their social media profile isn't big enough for them to be writing the book that they want to write. It's almost like people have confused social media profile and expertise.
Sounds a bit backwards, actually. It's the social media before the book.
Yeah, and I've seen like 6-figure deals go to people who have like 500 followers on Twitter, but they are an expert. But the difference is they are white and posh. So let's throw money at the white posh people, right? But there have been, and like there's also the added thing of like, if you are a person of color and you are an expert in something other than race, publishers are often like, why aren't you writing about the race part of this? But just to kind of, that's a separate conversation for a separate time. But the thing that I do specifically want to talk about is like, social media doesn't mean you're an expert at anything.
Except maybe social media.
Donald Trump in his heyday of buffoonery had how many million followers, and he was an expert in nothing, right? Except racism. But
sorry, who were you talking about there? I talked over you. Who were you mentioning?
Donald Trump. But the thing that I think so a social media or being someone who is saying something that no one else is saying, whether it is on social media, where you're using social media to tell a story about a particular thing, or you're writing about it on these media platforms, or your own Substack or your own site, or any of these places, or you're just an expert at like an academic institution or like in a professional environment or somewhere about something, like however many Twitter followers you have or however many Instagram followers you have, I sort of think is irrelevant compared to the thing that you're saying that no one else is saying that we should all know about. I don't know if that's too much of a tangent, but it's just something I've noticed. I didn't want to repeat what Christine and Léonicka had said, so I thought I'd add another perspective.
Excellent tangent. Thank you for that tangent. Something I read when I was starting to organize this panel, I read in the New Statesman, Sarah Manavis wrote this. She was writing about Goodreads, which has 90 million users, which was started by a husband and wife team in 2007. And by 2013, it had been bought up by Amazon. So, and that, according to Sarah Manavis in the New Statesman, she says that's when all the trouble started. And I'm quoting her here: the utopia Goodreads was founded to create has become closer to purgatory. And then she goes on, many now use Goodreads purely to track their reading rather than get recommendations or build a community. And she says that Goodreads and Amazon dominate web searches for books. But as a book tracker, she says Goodreads barely works. Léonicka, Christine, well, any of you, do you have comments on what Sarah Manavis is saying?
I think I'm trying to say this in the gentlest way, because I don't want to be dismissive of any points that she made. But sometimes I think we expect too much from these platforms. I'm not trying to make friends based on what kinds of books they read. That is not how I form friendships. And I think the idea that community can be had based on we've read the same book is naive in the first place. And so I have lowered my expectations of Goodreads significantly, and therefore I enjoy it quite a bit. I don't really use it to connect with people. I have plenty of other ways to connect with people. I use it to keep track of how many books I read a month and write little reviews for myself, which are not literary criticism and should not be expected to be. And I tell writers to stay off Goodreads because, again, so user-generated content is always rewarded for being as inflammatory as possible. So it's either going to hurt your feelings or it's going to be boost your ego on nonsense, right? So it's full of gifs of people who like, oh my goodness, I love it so much. This is the book that has saved my life, but it's not out yet and people are giving it 5 stars. Or it's saying this book was the worst book that ever was created. I wouldn't use it as toilet paper. This author should go die. Like it's such extremes. So is she right that it's not like a healthy community? Yes, but why are you looking for community on Goodreads is my response. I think, again, it's a tool. If it's a great way to get people knowing the book exists, that's it.
Nikesh, you had a big smile there at one point. Christine, I'll come to you in a minute.
Yeah.
Nikesh, you were responding to that?
Yeah, I was just agreeing with what Léonicka said about how Goodreads is not a space for writers. I tell every writer who has got a book coming out, we all remind each other, don't go on Goodreads. I have people who go on my Goodreads and, I'm pretty sure they've never read a single thing that I've written, but they dislike me enough to leave very personal 1-star reviews. Wow. But as a writer, I want to know what is the use for me to go on Amazon and see that a book that I spent 2 years of my life working on get 1 star because the person bought the Kindle edition when they meant to buy the audiobook. And for me, that's just like, and yet like I remember one of my publishers really, really encouraging me to get people to do Amazon reviews. And I was just like, why? Someone bought this at the same time that they bought a new plastic trim for their shower. and a massive bag of salted almonds, right? So like it's a product, like, and reviewing it in that same way is sort of bonkers. But like the other thing about Goodreads, if you spend too much time reading the reviews, you end up losing faith in yourself as a writer, in your intention as a writer, because the thing that no one tells writers enough when they're first starting out is that once a book comes out, it doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to readers. That's why, you know, me and a bunch of writer friends, we always have this Jay-Z joke where, you know, as soon as one comes out, we'll text the group and go on to the next one, because otherwise you're just going to be finding yourself at 2 a.m. reading Goodreads reviews. And, you know, readers project their lives onto your book. They project themselves, they project their intentions onto the pages that you've written. Like a good reader will try and find your intention. But, you know, when it's just ephemera, in like, you know, reviewing a product, then to give you another example, I have a 1-star review of a novel that it took me 20 years to write, because the reader bought it and felt that she hadn't learned enough about the evils of the British Empire. These are her specific words. It was a multi-generational family drama. Why did you think that? Buy a non-fiction book by like Satnam Sangera or Premvada Gopal or like Shashi Tharoor or like any of these like Kahindi Andrews. Buy a book by them if you want to learn about the evils of the British Empire. Come to me for the hilarious family multi-generational immigration drama. Like, and so like that 1-star review is there for everyone to go, oh, should I get this book by Shukla? Oh, it's not enough about the British Empire. No, I'll go and do you know what I mean? Like it can lead people in weird. So like, and that's why I think people who are using it to track their own reading, that is brilliant. Like that is like a really worthwhile thing. I don't know why you'd want a community out of it, and I don't know why you as a writer would want to go searching for it. In the same way that you shouldn't keyword search your own name on Twitter or Google search your own name, you're invariably going to find some dark stuff. Like what a couple of years ago, I made the mistake of looking myself up on the internet, and I found an 8chan forum thread dedicated to people wanting to kill me. And this is how absurd it was. When I took it to the police, their reaction was, it's very unclear whether the poster wants to shoot you in the face or all Jewish people, or you and all Jewish people. And I was like, any of those possibilities are still a worry. Like, it's like, whichever way you look at it, it's really messed up. And so like, I just think as a writer, don't go looking for this stuff.
Okay, Christine. Thank you, Nikesh. Thank you. Christine.
Yeah, I used to be a fan of Goodreads, both as a reader and professionally. But I thought that when Amazon purchased Goodreads, that was an extremely alarming development. Amazon's dominance in the world really is dangerous, and in the book industry specifically, it's dangerous to publishers, because Amazon is like pushing all this self-published crap through Kindle Unlimited, and it's dangerous to bookstores, which Amazon is dedicated to basically making go out of business.
Yes.
So that they purchased what was an independent community of book lovers and readers around the world, exchanging thoughts and discovering books, and turning it into a sales tool that is terrifying, I think.
And it's all about algorithms now, right?
Yes. Yeah. And it's just Amazon now using all this information for their own purposes. And they already had enough reach into our lives.
Just one other thing I've read recently, and maybe of interest, and you may have seen this, Léonicka, since you're interested in YA books, and Nikesh, you write them. I read in a New York Times book column recently, TikTok may not seem like an obvious destination for literary conversation, but Book Talk, where users recommend books, record time lapses of them, we're talking about teens here, record time lapses of themselves reading, or sob openly into the camera after an emotionally crushing ending helps drive sales. And it seems that there are two teenagers in the UK, sisters, I think, who started a TikTok account called A Life of Literature in February. And one of their videos has been viewed more than 5 million times. And a director at Barnes & Noble says that book talk videos have led to tens of thousands of sales per month. So there's some scary numbers for you. Anybody have something to say about that? Yes, Léonicka, go ahead.
I mean, those are good numbers. Sales are always good, in my opinion. But I think, and I wish we had more time, but I think what we're circling around this conversation is that social media and the internet is good for data, it's good for products, but it's bad for people. And that's the struggle, right? It is designed to create a positive feedback loop where you tell it what you want to see and it shows you more of what you want to see and continue that forward, right? But that's not good for human beings. And it's good for products like peanut butter and toilet paper and Lysol, but for art, for thought, for nuance, it's not. And unfortunately, publishing is in this intersection and doesn't know and has trouble separating the two. So our artists who are deep thinkers, who are working on things for very long times, are then asked to strip away their humanity and peddle their wares. And that dissonance is what causes a lot of the friction and the pain and the difficulty. And I recognize what Christine says about how publishers feel like they can't speak about their views or can't say anything personal. I, as an agent, am often told that I shouldn't speak about my views and shouldn't get too personal or political. But our wares are ideas, so they're inherently political. They're like what we've decided to put out in the world is sets of ideas, and the ones we prioritize reveal our politics. So book talk and the ability to sell, it's no different than Twitter, than Snapchat, than any of these platforms, right? It's all the platform feeds on emotion, it feeds on sensationalism. Teens crying for a camera is very sensational, so obviously that would sell. Cute babies also sell. Cute dogs. People take pictures of the book and the dog all the time, and that, oh my God, it shares. But again, when we try to separate the book, the physical book, the product, and the ideas contained within, we get into trouble. That's how we get people purchasing a whole bunch of anti-racist books in July of 2020 and then never reading them. That's how we get to that point.
Christine, did you want to respond here?
Sorry, I was muted. To which point? There were so many.
It was a very good summing up, though, of what we are circling around, I think. That the idea that it's good for a product, but it's very bad for people, basically.
Yes, I 100% agree. And that's the advice I would give everyone. Use the internet professionally only and keep your private life out of it. Use it to sell your books. Don't use it to look for friends. Don't use it to, feed your self-esteem. Keep any emotions out of it, I guess.
What seems to be one of the new kids on the block is something called the StoryGraph, which specializes in book recommendations. So they help you find a book based on your mood, on your your favorite themes and topics. Their motto is, because life's too short for a book you're not in the mood for. You have any response to that approach? Should mood be the thing that directs readers, Nikesh?
Yeah, I think the thing about StoryGraph and also those people on TikTok, I confess I am 40, so I have never been on TikTok. But I think what works about the popularity of StoryGraph, which I think lots of people signed up to as a way of having a more ethical alternative to Goodreads, and also these book TikTok or whatever it's called. What's so good about them is that they are very organic things that have sprung up out of a reader's need, and I'm I hope they continue to be organic and grow organically before like business and commerce and capitalism arrive to kind of try and monetize them and turn them into sales. Because then I have noticed that on Bookstagram, where people posting really beautiful photos of their books next to their delicious coffees. Remember delicious coffees, guys, and not just like the turgid crab we have to make at home. And I lie, I am a coffee snob. I have worked out how to make nice coffee at home, but that has now sort of become like a thing that publishing feeds with like galley proof giveaways and all the rest of it, and I understand that this is a business, and writers want to write things that will sell copies, and publishers want to buy books that will sell copies, and agents want to find writers who are making amazing work who will write books that will sell copies, and all the rest of it. But I do hope that some of these things continue to grow organically, because actually that's how they remain influential, I think.
Léonicka, you're nodding now.
I just agree. I agree. I think a lot of what the trends are trying to replicate what happened organically. And once those things pass, the things that happened organically remain. So the books that you remember are generally the books that you ended up reading and you passed to your friends and you actually talked about to people in person. So the value of reading a book, loving it, and talking about it remains, no matter what platform you choose to do with that on.
It's an interesting point, though, that Nikesh made, that the communities and platforms develop organically, and as soon as they become successful, they get appropriated by lots of companies trying to sell stuff and advertise. I mean, at this point, when I log into Amazon looking for a book, I don't find the book. I just find 50 million sponsored posts. And that unfortunately seems to happen to many of these platforms, that it becomes impossible to basically, find the real organic content and sift it out of all the paid for advertising content.
I also wonder, do social media sites ever get things really wrong, like misunderstand the book or the author that you're trying to promote, like place it in the wrong category? Or does that happen?
And negative reviews happen online as they would do in traditional print media. Misclassifications, not as much, because we have very strong, solid Onyx feeds. So most of the info that's fed out is ours. Amazon sometimes does whatever they want and classifies however they want. I don't even check. But yeah, misunderstood, yes. But like total misinformation, not really.
Nikesh, you look like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, that thing of classification of art is an really interesting thing. I'm kind of fascinated. I remember reading like probably about a decade ago or 5 or 6 years ago, an article probably online, probably found through my social media feed, about the film Napoleon Dynamite and how Netflix had offered out like a substantial reward to algorithm makers to come up with an algorithm that could successfully recommend Napoleon Dynamite to people, because it's a really weird anomaly of a film. The type of people who it's sort of set in the 80s, but it's also about outsiders, but it's also quite mainstream, but it's also a comedy. It's a weird film, right? And it's a film where like the people you think would love it don't love it, and the people who you think, wow, you're really going to hate this film, they absolutely adore it. And so Netflix was like, how do we put this into an algorithm? How do you recommend successfully recommend the next film to watch after you've seen Napoleon Dynamite and either loved it or hated it, or given it 3 out of 5 stars, which is like the most damning thing you can do to a thing. Like,
oh my God, I don't know
love it or hate it. And I'm sure, like, because time has passed, they've worked out how to categorize or recommend things based on Napoleon Dynamite. But to me, like, so many books are like Napoleon Dynamite, right? Like, Normal People by Sally Rooney is a book that, people who it would be catnip for seem to really despise it, and people who, like, I don't necessarily think I'm the target market for Normal People. And I remember taking it away with me when I was teaching on a writing retreat, and I hadn't brought anything else. I just brought this book, and the first few pages I was a bit like, oh God, these guys are a bit tedious. But by the end, I was utterly bewitched. I was utterly bewitched by the story of Connell and Marianne, obsessed with it. And it just made me go, well, how does this then work? I know that the algorithms are smart, and I know
it's not just that, it's BISEC categories. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the US BISEC categories that the whole book classification system is based on, but they are ridiculous. There are like 50 different romance with firefighters, romance with police officers, romance with whatever supermarket cashiers categories. But there isn't a single one, for example, for international literature. So, I mean, great.
Léonicka, if you want to say a final word, and then I'm going to wrap things up. And also, if you want to leave people with a piece of advice for publishers or authors or agents, how to focus their efforts when it comes to social media. But Léonicka, I'll let you have the last word here.
Sure. So I guess I would say that a lot of these tools are trying to replicate or automate what humans already do. And so the closer you can go back to what humans are doing, I think the happier you'll be with the sales process and the less draining and gross it will feel. So it's always better to expound and share more opinions, whichever way feels comfortable and healthy and safe.
I think with those very wise words and comforting in a way, we'll end there. And I will thank Christine Swedowsky, Léonicka, Valcius, and Nikesh Shukla for taking part in this Blue Met event about social media intended for book industry professionals. And I'll mention, Nikesh, I think your latest book is Brown Baby, a memoir of race, family, and home, because you have it at the bottom of every one of your emails. That's how I know you're good at this promotion. It's published by Bluebird, which is an imprint of Pan Macmillan. It's been a pleasure meeting you all virtually and moderating this panel. And I'd like to thank the audience for joining us. This event is part of Blue Metropolis International Literary Festival. For more information about the festival, you can go to bluemetropolis.org/festival 2021, or in French, metropolisbleu.org, c'est pas un tiret vraiment, / je sais pas c'est quoi, Festival 2021. Thank you all very much.
Bye, thank you.